Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have this webinar with you and very excited to be joined by our special guest, Sarah Coy, who is Head of Innovation at the Royal Australian Mint. We'll be speaking with her a little later about her experience studying with us in previous studies, but also on the Master of Creative Intelligence and Strategic Innovation. So the program itself is relatively new. We started in June last year and started off with 2 intakes last year, but it has a long delta of development. And I just want to speak a little bit about my journey towards the Master of Creative Intelligence and Strategic Innovation and about how it come about. We'll give you a bit of a background. I'm joined by a few colleagues here tonight. You'll hear from Katrina Moore, who's been involved in the co-design of the program with our industry partners, and Amanda McGregor, our industry partnerships strategic director, is online as well to answer any Q&A session questions. So there is a chat feature that we're using in the webinar tonight, so I'd just ask you to use the Q&A function on Zoom, type your questions in there, and Amanda and the team are there ready to answer any questions as they come up. So as I said, my name is Roger. I'm Course Director of Master of Creative Intelligence and Strategic Innovation. I've been working with this body of work for just over 10 years now. So I joined UTS 10 years ago from the New South Wales Department of Justice to play a leadership role in the Designing Out Crime Research Centre with Professor Case Dorst, who we'll be hearing from virtually a little bit later tonight. Now, our mandate there was to find new ways of taking on complex social problems, particularly in the crime sphere. And we set about doing experiments using design thinking, and ended up bringing together a whole bunch of different practitioners from different disciplines, so architecture, urban planning, computer science, criminology, and a few others, and with a view to developing a way of working together. And what we ended up developing was a body of work that we refer to as designing for the common good. And over 140 impactful projects, real-world projects that you'd see the impact of around Sydney and indeed around Australia and the world. So after working there and developing this way of working, we started to think, well, perhaps we can start sharing how we're going about this, because this is a pretty special way of working that we've developed. So we started to develop the Graduate Certificate of Public Sector Innovation, which Sarah, who we'll be hearing from later, undertook, which really drew on the thinking behind how we went about what we did. At the same time, our TD school was developing and running the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation, which is a groundbreaking bachelor's program, multi-award winning, amazing students graduating, and an amazing partnership experience with industry partners. So very early on in the life of the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation, our industry partners started to ask us and say, your students are great and we're hiring them, but we need something for the people who are already working within our company. And that was really the seed for the Master of Creative Intelligence and Strategic Innovation. So I want to talk tonight a bit about the nuts and bolts of the program, some of the thinking behind it. Katrina will talk about the co-design process and some of the findings that came there, and we'll have an interview with Sarah to get real first-hand experience on what it's like studying the Master of Creative Intelligence and Strategic Innovation. I'll invite Katrina to talk a bit about the co-design process. Katrina.
Thanks, Roger. My name's Katrina. I work on the Masters of Creative Intelligence and Strategic Innovation. When we started looking at developing a master's program, we wanted to make sure that it was connected to the real world, to the challenges that are being faced in an ever-changing and ever-increasingly more dynamic environment and ecosystems that we're all existing in. So we undertook a number of co-design workshops with over 15 different corporate and private sector through to community organisations and not-for-profits. And we really delved into what are some of the challenges they're facing today, and what makes innovation hard in their organisations when they're trying to achieve and solve those challenges. And what we found through speaking to well over 100 people was that challenges in today's society are open, meaning they have no boundaries. They're complex in that they have many elements and relationships to them. They're networked, so across many organisations and stakeholders. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with the impact of some of those through 2020 and how COVID has played out. I feel like it definitely showed how networked some of the challenges society faces are and how networked we are as organisations. And they're also dynamic, so constantly changing. And these are the 4 streams that really resonated through these workshops that we ran. And what it also said to us about the current state is that no one knows the answer in complex problems. And when we don't know the answer, we choose what seems to be best. And traditionally that's been best practices, effective interventions, evidence-based strategies. And we also formulate a politics around risk management. So that's related to crisis management and market forces and freedom of choice. We also very much let ourselves be guided by effectiveness and efficiencies. So that's generally demonstrated by performance indicators, supervision and control, and a great anecdote about this very quickly is that with the introduction of people videoing incidences on the street, the police rule book has become thicker and thicker and thicker until the decision-making capability of police on the beat is actually now increasingly complex as well. So overall, what we heard was that business as usual isn't working in this changed new world we live in, and that we need a new approach. We need to become more flexible to mirror the changing world that we're now living in. What we also found is that if people are wanting to get is that they're not speaking to someone in marketing, but they're actually going to the person that they know in marketing, that shares their vision, that understands where they're coming from, understands the greater purpose about what that initiative is trying to achieve. So initiatives actually spread like relay races across an organisation from one person to the next who have similar understanding, similar languages, and particularly in situations where silos have been broken down, that really allows those initiatives to travel quickly and effectively through organisations.
Thanks, Katrina.
So the master's degree has been developed.
Thanks, Katrina.
Thanks,
so one of the things that we're finding in the initial people doing the Master of Creative Intelligence and Strategic Innovation is that it's giving them the opportunity to reimagine their why, so to revisit the purpose and motivation, also to rethink their how. So what is their practice? What do they already know? And how can that be applied in different contexts? And to reinvent their what. So really down at the methods level, picking up new tools, applying new tools, and creating their own innovation practice. The intent of the program with our industry partners is that it's really geared to help our industry partners future-proof their organisations. So to transform their approach to problem solving, to develop transdisciplinary practices, and to supercharge their innovation toolkit, cultivate an innovation ecosystem within their organisation and indeed across sectors, and become a game changer. I'll talk a little bit more about some of those concepts before we introduce the amazing Sarah Coy. But first we're going to hear from Kees Dorst. So Kees is the founding professor of the Master of Creative Intelligence and Strategic Innovation. Can't be with us at the moment. He's in lockdown in the Netherlands, but he's able to join us through this lovely animation.
Normally when people think about innovation, they think in terms of doing innovative projects. And what do you do then? Well, you do a project, you think about it, you reflect. You create insights that can lead to new experiments, and you do new projects, which is what we call the washing machine, because it goes around and around and the projects actually generate income, which is all good. But of course that's not the end game. What you really want to do is change the organization's practices, change its strategy, change its structure maybe when that's needed, and actually have impact on the whole sector, because these insights should really travel up organizations. What we found through our practice and research at UTS is that there's a problem with this. The link between practices and strategy is very, very difficult, and often it doesn't work. And why is that? Well, strategy tends to be determined top-down, from the sector downwards, instead of coming from the bottom up. So this is where innovation gets stuck. This is where innovation doesn't get to its full potential and doesn't have the impact that it should have. The sector reacts to what it sees as its relevant environment, its field. And with the insights that we have, we can also start influencing that perception, influencing that field. And once you can do that, then the top-down process and the bottom-up process work together to create innovation in the organization. The Masters of Creative Intelligence and Strategic Innovation at UTS was custom made to support organizations through all of these steps, effectively building a new innovation ecosystem within the organization. To find out more about the Master of Creative Intelligence and Strategic Innovation, please contact our partnerships team.
Thank you, Virtual Case. So the model that we just showed underpins the architecture of the Master of Creative Intelligence and Strategic Innovation, and there's a number of core pillars to it. So transdisciplinarity is the meeting of different disciplines. When they come together and work together on an issue, they create a new way of working. And if we can be intentional about that, then we can build an impactful way of creating transdisciplinary approaches to our complex problems. Also complexity. How do we deal with complexity? How do we approach it? How do we recognize complexity as opposed to something that's complicated? How do we do futuring? So how do we look to the future and create that path to the future that is desired within our organization or within our sector? And networks and ecosystems. What is the network that we need around us to help us create the innovation ecosystem that our organization or our sector or our practice needs? And underpinning all of that is intentionality. We are drifting into a future that is not of our choosing, and that's not okay. So how do we take the future by the horns and point it in a direction that is actually a desired future? So with that, I would like to introduce Sarah Coy. So Sarah, if I could ask you to take yourself off mute, and we'll have a bit of a chat. So Katrina's going to join us for the chat. Katrina, your internet was a bit breaky there, so if I jump in, it's just because you were cutting out a little bit. But thanks so much for joining us, Sarah. It's a real pleasure to have you here. We're on student vacation at the moment, so meeting up with you before we restart the MCISI program is a real treat. And as I mentioned before, we've been working together for a number of years. You were a participant on a previous program, the Graduate Certificate of Public Sector Innovation, and even before that you were a seasoned innovator, playing leadership roles in New South Wales health innovation. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey? We've got a few questions, but we'll just see where the chat takes us.
Yeah, sure. So I started in innovation in some way, shape or form about 15 years ago. Back then, it wasn't an official innovation role. It was more policy work or project-based work in the public sector. I found myself in a bit of a rut, and I was really wanting to push a little bit further. I had developed my own toolkit, but I didn't have my tribe. And so when I first came across TD School in the form of, back then it was, in designing out crime, our old little lair that we had. And I really found that coming on board, I found my tribe, and I found some comrades to help me go to battle. And back then it was a different kind of battle to the battles I have these days. But I really felt that I was embraced, and it doesn't matter about your background or your individual practices. We always found common ground, and we always found ways to challenge each other and push each other in ways that really brings out some amazing creativity. So first degree, that was the grad cert in public sector innovation. Used that and experimented with lots of the tools that I learnt. And I really found my groove at that point, and I was starting to apply some of these strategies at work. I started creating my own strategies, and it kind of blossomed from there. So when MCISI came up, I found out about it, I think, a couple of days before the very first intake. And I remember ringing Amanda frantically going, "You have a spot for me, don't you? I need to come back to my tribe." I'd moved to Canberra, and I had left Sydney behind me at that point, and my husband hadn't joined me in Canberra, and I was really just craving having that outlet to come and talk to people that are on my wavelength, that will help me and challenge me in ways to really perfect my own practice in my own individual way and contribute to other people's practices, which is definitely something that I've got on my journey with both UTS and TD School and now MCISI.
Thanks, Sarah. And you touch on something there around, you're in Canberra and you're doing the MCISI from Canberra. So initially this was going to be quite a Sydney-based degree, but of course launching a degree in 2020 face-to-face is never going to work. So we pivoted as a team, and that's enabled you to come on. It's enabled us to collaborate with people down in Melbourne, industry partners there, and participants from Melbourne, Canberra, Newcastle, regional New South Wales. But you also mentioned tribe, and I'm going to throw to Katrina to follow up on that, because Katrina is the tribe vibe master.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Roger. Talk to us a little bit more about the tribe, Sarah, and what that means to you and what you have gotten out of that. We meet obviously online, but would love to hear your experience of what that part of the program's been like for you.
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the things about TD School is that, transdisciplinarity is something that everybody brings something unique to the table. We have people from all over the place, people that I would never on a regular basis actually interact with. They're certainly not, if you look at my LinkedIn, they're not the sort of people that I would have connected with organically. And so it's creating opportunities for that cross-pollination between industry. It creates opportunities to think outside the box. One of my colleagues that I met in my first degree, we actually created a not-for-profit organisation together, just based on his practice and my own practice, and seeing some big gaps in the disaster, which was before COVID, the bushfires. And so using human-centered design, using reframing, using a lot of the initiatives and strategies that we learned through the public sector graduate certificate of public sector innovation, together we kind of combined forces and we created our own tribe. And some of those things resulted in, seeing issues with all of these dump trucks that were coming down the coast. People were sending 10 or 12 dump trucks full of donations. And then we had burnt out communities that had no way of storing these. And so together we ended up creating opportunities by finding industry partners to intercept these donations, sort them in Sydney and Canberra, put them into what we had these big, what are they called? Shipping containers. And we were actually deploying these portable warehouses with donations in that. So to help burnt out communities actually have a safe place to store the donations, but also rations so that they can survive. And I remember sitting there with the army director who was in charge down at Bateman's Bay. And, you know, he was getting phone calls that there was a community in Corma that had gone without water for 6 days, and they were drinking green water because there was no drinking water. And I was able to watch our donations leave Bateman's Bay on a truck that day to be delivered where it needed. And there's no way we could have achieved things like that had we not met and created this tribe and created opportunities for our practices to combine and challenge each other, because his skill set is completely different to my skill set. But with our powers combined, we were able to do something really meaningful for the community. So when I say tribe, that's an extreme version of tribe, but it's also, you know, a place for us to connect. I've been listening to our MCISI playlist on Spotify this week, and just having each other's energy around each other and listening to the things that motivate each other just in the form of music, I found so inspiring. And I've been playing around because I'm working on my own strategy for this year for work. And I've had a few random comments, because if you come into my office at the moment, I've got crayons everywhere and I have drawings of trains, and I'm listening to the MCISI playlist, and I'm just relaxing before another big year. And that's another great example of the tribe that we've created here. Even when we're apart and not studying together, we're still connected, which is great.
Hey, Sarah, you mentioned a few practices there. You mentioned human-centered design, design thinking, framing. Can you talk a little bit about how the MCISI has been useful in seeing the various options and various approaches?
Yeah, for sure. So Roger and I talk offline about this a bit. What we do in my team in particular, we have what we call methodology dance-offs. So every time I learn something new, we want to do a dance battle, which is, well, let's have a look at what this can actually contribute to our ecosystem that we've created. And I feel like we've come full circle this week, because I was meeting with my support officer and I had this idea, and she came at me with this dance battle, and she's like, well, I'm just going to reframe what you're saying, because I actually think that you're creating this opportunity where we're going to disengage a few people, and here's my idea. And she actually battled them out for me, and I'm going, oh God, I'm creating a monster. I'm actually, you know, MCISI starting to bleed out into my professional career as well. So yeah, I think there's no one size fits all. Innovation is not cookie cutter approach. And I think to be an innovator with one set of tricks, you're really dismissing some amazing opportunities. One of the things that we see a lot in innovation is, particularly if you try and solve a problem here, there's almost creating another set of problems over here, unless you really truly understand the system that you're working within. And so if you come at a systems design problem with design thinking, you're only going to get a third of the way, and you're actually going to create more problems towards the end than had you actually come at it with the right methodology. And so what I love about MCISI is I'm always learning, and we're being pragmatic about it. You know, we're learning these new concepts, and then we're applying it in our real life. But sometimes the methodology needs to match the organization you're working within, the people you're talking to. If I came at my boss with a reframe on day one, he would probably go, whoa. But if we build up to that with another series and taking them on the journey with different innovation tools, when I come to him with reframing, he's going to embrace that because he can see the benefits of it. And so that's what I love about MCISI. You know, it's never a, if you learn this, then your life's going to be easier. It's more like, here's a set of tools that are going to help you survive in the real world, and you apply what works for you, and you don't apply the things that don't work. And that's totally fine in our tribe. And if anything, we come back and we discuss it. You know, why didn't it work here? Okay, let's have a look at this. And you know, having the opportunity to meet with some of the amazing people that are on our course, and there are some pretty amazing people, I'm able to learn a little bit about their strategies. So if I come at it from an innovation lens and I need to have a business management lens, I've got that person that I can bounce those ideas off, and together we've learned a little bit more, because you gain a little bit of their perspective and a little bit of their expertise. And it's kind of like the mushroom effect. We're not in the dark and, you know, huddled close together, but we're growing together, which is awesome and a great feeling.
And it sort of reminds me of the Maslow's hammer effect. If you only have a hammer, then you're walking around looking for nails, or walking around treating everything as if it is a nail. And for those of you all listening tonight who have been in the innovation space for long enough, you will have seen the different flavours of the month and year sort of cycle through, and so here we go again with a new thing. Yeah. What we tend to do in MCISI is really to drill down behind the practices and to understand the logic that those practices are engaging, and to make it a bit easier to spot when to use a particular approach, because there's so much value there. Could you talk a bit more about that, Sarah?
Yeah, for sure. You know, you actually remind me of a story. And this is how I left healthcare, believe it or not. We were meeting for uni one night, and I remember Verity Firth came in and she's like, guys, I have a problem. And I remember, you know, as a group, we were solving this really complex problem. And back then she was the Minister for Education. So first of all, you had to, you know, get over that whole, oh my God, the Minister for Education just walked into uni. And I remember we were supposed to be presenting something completely unrelated, and the whole evening got sidetracked by this problem that we're going to solve. But it was so exciting because I got to see that all of the skills that I applied in healthcare, and all of the journey that I had, and all of the battles that I had to get to that point, I was able to apply them in the education space. And to me, and that was a whole different perspective for them, because I came at it from a healthcare perspective. And I just remember at that moment, I'm like, you know what, this is my aha moment. There's not one set of tools that you can just come in and smash with a hammer. There's lots of different tools, and each of them suit each different situation and scenario that you're in. And so that was a huge moment for me, because that was actually when I went, you know what, I think I'm done with healthcare after 15 years. I think it's time to sort of branch out. And I never would have taken my dream job, which is, you know, head of innovation at the Royal Australian Mint, had I stayed in healthcare, which is amazing. And that's just a little bit of my journey, but definitely that was how I got there, for sure.
So helping you unpack what it is that is your practice and see that it can be applied elsewhere. Yeah,
for sure. A big thing as well as motivation. So sometimes when you get to a certain point in your career and you realize that things that motivated you 2 years ago no longer motivate you. And the example is that, you know, I got into healthcare because my sister had a chronic illness, and I ended up leaving at a point where I thought, you know what, there's nothing left for me to give. My sister's healthy again. And so those motivations that was there, that I was trying to fix what I thought was systemic issues with healthcare system, and doing some amazing stuff along the way, working in pediatrics and geriatrics. My career went to different parts that I didn't think that I'd get to. But I realized, okay, so I've been fighting for human-centered design for all these years, trying to get surgeons to get, you know, co-design treatment plans with patients. I feel like I've won those battles now. It's time to start new motivations and new battles, which has just been a completely different trajectory altogether. But again, all of the lessons that I learned on that journey, they 100% still apply today.
Amazing. Thank you.
In a different form.
Thanks for sharing, Sarah. I'm going to jump back in. I'm curious to hear, I would love to invite you to speak a little bit about how classes work together when they're online, and how you're working together, as you were talking before, with the tribe and with the other participants, and what that's like as part of the experience.
Yeah, for sure. So, every week we come together for the lecture, and I always love that. But where the real learning happens is actually when we all get together after uni, and we talk about, well, the perspectives that we took from that week and how we're going to apply it in real world. And then what that has created is, I guess, a subset of where you evolve the lessons and learning by working together and understanding different perspectives, because all of us get something different out of the lecture. But at the moment, I'm actually working on a innovation table, which is around maturity levels of innovation and how that works within my organisation. And I'm currently working on that with somebody from Transport New South Wales, and his perspectives around manufacturing from a train perspective has just been completely different. And what that has done is actually pushed me to evolve my thinking and my strategy, so that when I go back to my meetings with my bosses in the real world, not just uni world, I come with an evolved sense of thinking, as well as what I've learnt that week. And submitting my assignments, I feel like the real world assignments have given me lots of perspective as well, which is great.
Sarah,
Mm-hmm.
over the break, and maybe this goes sort of back to Graduate Certificate of Public Sector Innovation as well, but over the break, how did you explain the program to people who you were having Christmas lunch with or whatever?
Keep in mind, we're still in isolation. We didn't actually have a Christmas lunch, but the way I've been describing it to my colleagues, because I've actually had quite a few people that work with me come to me and go, you know what, you feel different this year. Just working with you has been a different perspective, and beyond the pandemic. The way I've been describing it is, I feel like we're on a journey with like-minded people and completely opposite-minded people, and together we're growing as a team. And I'm learning this through learning different methodologies, challenging assumptions that I've always held near and dear to my heart, and just understanding my practice and the impact that it has on the ecosystem, and how to align myself with people that will impact my ecosystem in a positive way that I might be lacking. That is how I've been describing it to my friends and family, for sure. But I have to say, I've had quite a few comments of people going, your practice has evolved, and it's almost because I have a greater understanding of my practice now, for sure.
And when we first met, before the Graduate Certificate of Public Sector Innovation, you were already an established innovator.
Yep.
Could you talk a little bit about the skill spread of the MCISI participants? And because we've got superstars of innovation like yourself, we've got superstars who haven't perhaps studied innovation, we've got superstars who haven't perhaps studied at uni before. Could you talk a bit about the diversity and what that brings to the experience?
Yeah, absolutely. We have CEOs within our cohort. We have chief operating officers of very large organizations. We've got people like me who I feel are the small fish. We've got policy officers. We've got, you name it, we've got it. And we've got people working in education. There's a trend, not necessarily though. We're quite diverse and spread out. We've got architects of design architects, not as in, the traditional architecture. Who else? We've got consultants, we've got strategists. I'm just trying to think of everyone that I've got to work with this year. We're pretty diverse. And I think that we all have our different perspectives that we bring and our practices. And I think it was in the Fields of Thought session, we actually got to learn a little bit about each other's different practices and bring that to the table. And that was part of our group exercises, which was great because I started to learn some, business strategy methods. And I started understanding a little bit about some of the different disciplines and how I could apply that to innovation and vice versa. So there's one particular engineer that I was working with, and I remember he was so linear in the first project. And, we would have these really robust discussions. And his wife, ironically, is a design practitioner. And I remember at one point, he's like, gosh, sometimes talking to you reminds me of having discussions with my wife. And I'm actually married to an engineer myself, so I get the whole linear approach and how they have to go through things methodically. But learning a little bit about his way of having to go through the motions, and then looking at reframing it and learning a little bit about my practice, we landed at a common ground, and our assignment was completely different to had I just tackled it myself, which is great. And I think that just adds to the richness of diversity.
Yeah, you've touched there, I think, on some of the awesome serendipity that happens through the program, and how by reflecting on our own practices and sharpening our own practices and collaborating with people from very different practices. And that's something that we've definitely built into the program, really creating that space for not just collaboration, but for learning together about yourselves and learning together about how to work with very diverse disciplines. And Kat, I want to invite you to ask another question around the MCISI program. So we also have a bit of an agenda behind the program, and we're always very much open about that. So most of the subjects, and I'll talk through some of the subjects and the structure of the program shortly, but most of them are very much as Sarah has been describing. They're topics where there's lectures, there's readings, there's online collaboration, and people pick them up and apply them in their workplace. But we also have created little moments throughout the program where we can come together and apply it to a shared societal issue. Katrina, could you frame that into a question as you'd like?
Yeah, thanks, Roger. So we haven't been shy in terms of tackling some of the big societal challenges, and we've been working with a wonderful partner organisation called Thriving Communities Partnership, who've been woven into the masterclass and other subjects. They exist to help deal with inequality and create fair access to people who are experiencing vulnerability. And they're bringing together different sectors, from the public service to private sector to community, and the voice of lived experience. So we've been very privileged to work with TCP. And Sarah, I'd love to invite you to kind of share your reflections on TCP and that space that the MCISI participants have been working with TCP in.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, TCP is an amazing organisation, and the opportunity to work with both, two of the highest up people within the organisation has been such an honour. The openness to us critically going through their practices and giving us opportunities to apply our learnings and creating our own perspectives and handing it back to them, and their openness and willingness to work with us has just been so empowering. It's an amazing organisation. I would love for the Royal Australian Mint to actually have a seat at the round table there, because what they do for society is nothing short of amazing. I was just reviewing some of the new literature they released this week on LinkedIn. And it's definitely going to be something I review in depth this weekend. But even the opportunity to reframe vulnerability and try and come up with a better name for it was just so amazing, and looking for common threads and how different organisations can help with vulnerability in Australia, and how that is rapidly evolving because of COVID and lots of other like the bushfires and the floods, and there's been lots of different drivers for the change in societal issues. And organisations like TCP are pretty amazing. So for me, that was the masterclass, wasn't it? The first session. Gosh, it feels like a year ago. But it was just such an amazing experience to work with Cara, and I can't remember the other lady we got to work with, but she was pretty amazing too.
Thanks, Sarah. And we'll be working with TCP on the upcoming masterclass in February, and also on the first studio of 2021 and subsequently. Sarah, I really want to thank you for coming tonight. It's been a great chat. Please stick around. I'm just going to, there's some questions coming up about subject-related material, so I'm just going to bring the slide deck back up. But thank you very much for joining us tonight, and thank you for sharing your experience. So I'd like to just talk a bit about the content. I've touched on the core pillars, but there's a question from Vardine around impact measurement, and I think the best way to answer that question is to talk through really the nuts and bolts of the program. So each of these little boxes, so the small boxes, is what we call it has the structure of a 3 credit point subject. So what that means in practical terms is that it's a 6-week subject done online. It's equivalent to about 60 hours of learning. Some of that is reading. Some of that is online activities that we give you. Some of that is the face-to-face talks and online sessions that we host each week. Some of that is group work with your peers. And some of that is the assignments for each of the subjects. So the masterclass, which starts in the beginning of February, so coming up soon, is an overview of the 4 of the core theoretical pillars. So practices, transdisciplinarity, complexity, networks and ecosystems, and futures. And each of those core subjects has a key enabling methodology attached to it, which is also a 3 credit point subject. So if the core subjects are a bit more theoretical, and when I say a bit more theoretical, we're very much academics, we're very much about things being immediately applicable. So while we do go into some of the thinking behind the concepts, we temper that with activities that you can pick up and use in your workplace pretty much straight away. And a lot of the feedback we get on the subject so far is that the subjects are immediately applicable in the workplace. So each of those core subjects has a key enabling methodology, which is mostly much more about very practical tools, less theoretical, but still at that master's level. So the general route that you might take would be a masterclass. You'd then have a week or 2 weeks break, do practices and transdisciplinary action, which is about really looking at what underpins you as a practitioner. What have you learnt? If you've studied before, what are the assumptions behind the discipline? What is your practice? If you haven't studied before, that's absolutely fine. This is a program for people who are professionals, and not every professional has a degree behind them, but every professional has a practice and a way of working. So practices and transdisciplinary action is about understanding what that is and making it explicit and building on it. Thinking complexly is a bit of a journey through some of the the ways of looking at the world that have brought us to where we are now. So we do a bit of philosophy in there, we do a bit of mythology in there, looking at how do myths still shape our organisations and society. And the general flow of the program is that we will do a couple of those micro-credential topic-based subjects, and then we'll do a studio. And our studio partner for Studio 1 this year is Thriving Communities Partnership. And we've got an advisory panel made up of people from across public sector, private sector, to help us sharpen that studio brief. So participants will bring their own practice into that studio, but they'll also bring the things that they picked up through the MCISI program and apply it to that real world live studio topic. Now, in the past, we've used this approach on other programs, and the impact of that is quite visible in Sydney in particular through design, anything from the design of rubbish bins to influencing government policy and strategy. The flow then goes to a lab. So if you're joining us through an organisation, then the lab will be very much looking at your organisation and what are the paradigms, what are the underlying assumptions that your organisation has around the issues that it deals with. We'll then move on to a subject, the complexity subject, where we'll look at all of those various complex systems theory, Cynefin framework, and dig deep under what is complexity as opposed to just complicated. Frame creation and coevolution is a subject that builds on the work of Kees Dorst and myself and the Designing Out Crime team. So it's a mature body of work that is very much around how to step by step take on a complex issue and reframe it and get to a place that's better than where you started. And I think that's a good example of what we're doing with this degree. So with each of these subjects, yes, we're touching on the orthodox way of looking at things, so the orthodoxy of complexity at a master's level, but we're bringing our own experience to it and our own UTS-ness about it. So with the Futures subject, for example, we're collaborating with the Institute for Sustainable Futures and drawing on their very practical, real-world way of, and unique way of futuring. So the general flow there is a number of these subjects, then we do a studio, which is very much that collaborative space on a shared societal issue, and then you can take that learning back into the lab. So the lab, I mentioned before, if you're joining as an organisation, you'll focus on your organisation innovation approach. If you're joining as self-funded or self-directed, then you'll be looking at a topic of your choice. So that can be a passion project, or it can be something that will help you at work. So Lab 2 is around applying the subjects that you've done to date to map out what might be a desired paradigm and what might some experiments be in order to move yourself towards that paradigm. Networks and ecosystems, drawing on our wonderful Martin Blimmel from UTS and his work in the entrepreneur space, as well as other ways of developing networks and the ecosystem around us that we might need. Changing Minds is the key enabling methodology to that. Theory of change, which starts to touch on that question of how to measure impact, futures and future value and impact. And future value and impact is definitely the one where we're looking at the various ways of measuring impact. It then goes into the final studio and the final lab, where you're developing an innovation strategy for your organisation or a desired path forward for your passion project. We finish off with a symposium where all of the participants will be presenting a paper in an academic setting, and we've got a view to looking to special issue journals or monographs or published proceedings, so that every participant walks away with a published paper, whether it be in a journal or just published edited proceedings online. So everyone walks away with an academic publication behind them. What it looks like in the year ahead is we're running a masterclass in February, so over the 6 weeks starting in February. While the people who join us in that masterclass, and that the masterclass is the first subject, so that's the only prerequisite. You can you pretty much choose your own adventure through this program, but the masterclass is the very first subject that you have to take. It's a prerequisite. So while the people who join us for that February masterclass are doing that, the people who are with us, like Sarah and her other colleagues, will be doing frame creation and co-evolution. I should mention that the classes are usually on a Wednesday or Thursday night, 7 till 9 p.m, and we tend to hang around till around 10, just chatting it through, as Sarah talked before, in a more casual, not recorded session. The other thing is we record every session, every lecture and every discussion, and get that out to participants. So as Sarah mentioned, a lot of the people doing this program are in pretty high pressure jobs. They're not always able to make it to the session every time. So we record it and we get that online for them the next day. Is what we aim for, and we tend to deliver on that. So for the people who are joining us in February in the masterclass, the next subject that you'd be likely to do, although there is flexibility, is practices and transdisciplinary action, followed by fields of thought or the studio, followed by take your pick, basically, of those. There is a logic to it, and we tend to discuss with every participant what the logical flow for them would be on each of the decision points, basically. So that's what this year looks like overall for the MCISI, and for those of you who are joining us, you can probably see a pathway through there emerging. If you can't, that's absolutely fine. We speak with all of the participants about which subject is best to do when. Which really brings us down to the nuts and bolts. So we've got 3 intakes this year. The first one begins on the 1st of February. Applications close on the 22nd of January. The application process is not onerous. There is a bit of a few gateways to get through, but we're on hand to help you through the admin process of that. And as I say, the conditions for entry are not that you've studied before. We're really looking for people who are experienced in their career, sort of mid to late career, as well as people who have studied and have significant work experience. So this is not a degree for someone who's just out of the undergrad, but it's very much for the experienced mid to late career professional. So if you haven't studied before, don't worry about that. There's definitely, this degree has actually been made for you. So February session starts 1st of February, applications close 22nd of January. There's a May session starting on the 17th of May, applications close for that on the 8th of May, and a September session which starts on the 6th of September, applications close on the 25th of August. And I think there's one thing that has come up, and I'd just like to make it a bit explicit. We have a number of people on our program who are fully sponsored by their workplace. So their organisation has signed up to for them to do the master's program together with a view to doing those labs. We also have people who are semi-sponsored by their organisation. So their organisation has a study program, and this master's program is subsidised by their workplace. We also have participants who are self-funding, and they're doing that either by paying up front or by using fee help if they're eligible for fee help. Any further questions? And I just want to reiterate that we are on deck to take your emails and calls tomorrow or whenever you're ready to talk. Amanda's details are up there on screen, so give her a shout, give Katrina or myself a shout as well, particularly if you're an organisation or from an organisation looking to bring some of your colleagues on. That would be great. But more generally, we would love to have you on board, and I would like to thank you all very much for coming. We've got a couple of minutes left, so if there's any questions, please pop them into the Q&A. I'm going to invite Sarah back for any final reflections, Sarah, to give people the opportunity to enter some questions into the Q&A.
Yeah, happy to. One thing that we didn't cover, and something that I found for my personal journey, is my organisation's response to transdisciplinary practice and how powerful that was, especially with COVID. And our organisation was quite unique because we remained open as an essential service, but half of us had to work from home. We didn't have enough licenses for everybody to work from home. And so there was this mishmash of disconnect, and we had to respond to that really quickly. And the organisation allowed us to take this transdisciplinary approach to how the organisation was going to respond post-COVID. And we literally grabbed people that have never worked together, possibly wouldn't work together, to solve this complex problem. And we did that through, definitely through, regular education. We had weekly sessions, about 2 hours, so that we would all learn together, but then we would each come together and share reflections, very much like MCISI. It was almost like I recreated it. And my organisation really started to see the value of a transdisciplinary approach because traditionally, you know, you go to the subject matter experts and you get your information from that because it's evidence-based, it's best practice. They're going to come at you with the right policies, and that's their day-to-day work, right, to know their job. But this gave us a really holistic approach to solving that problem, and I don't think we're ever going to go back now. I think we've got a taste for transdisciplinary practice, and we want more.
Yeah, there's a scene in The Matrix which reminds me a bit about this program. It's a bit of a pink pill, blue pill situation.
Or Alice in Wonderland, we can just keep eating and drinking until we get the answer we want. Yep.
Sarah, thanks again so much for joining us. It's been wonderful to have your chat, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We'll get a copy of this recording available tomorrow morning if it comes back from Zoom, but we'll be ready to edit it and get it up for you tomorrow morning. We'll also get a more polished version out to you a bit later. There is an information pack as well that we can send to you in the first instance, and as I said before, we are but a phone call away. So thank you all for joining us. Good night.